Dare great things for Christ. Christ calls us to dare great things. In the marketplace, as well as in the mission field, there has never been a time like the present for the spirit of the Catholic entrepreneur. Now is the time for men and women of great courage and great vision to engage our church and our culture. Now is the time to dare great things. And here is your host as we dare great things, Father Nathan Cromley, the president and founder of the St. John Institute.
If there's one common denominator across all societies and all times, it's that human beings have to work. From finding the necessities of survival to advancing technology to a new level, regardless of the many ways that it can manifest itself, the imperative to work is common to all of us. Does this mean, however, that our lives are constrained? Does this mean, however, that our lives are constrained to difficulty and toil? What about work benefits us and makes us good? Okay, everybody, today I'm going to take you on a deep dive. I'm going to focus with you on something that is written in Aristotle. And I think to myself, isn't this neat opportunity? I mean, when was the last time you got to talk about Aristotle? So you can write this one down as something you can talk about with your friends at a party, right? Because I can guarantee you there's not many of them that have studied Aristotle. So you don't have to study Aristotle necessarily because you can listen to me here. But I mean, that's what we do here at the St. John Leadership Network. We make, intelligent things come alive for you. And I want you to get an appreciation for this thinker. Because Aristotle is one of those people whose mind helped shape the entire world that we live in now. All right, so he's not one of he's not the only one, but he's one of the few most important thinkers. If you were to make a list of like the top 10 people whose thought shaped the world that we live in right now, he would make that list. Okay, he lived and died about 400 years before Christ and was an ancient Greek philosopher. And his thinking was marked by a sense of realism, right? So he was focused on this. Now, why is this important for us? Well, what does he have to say as a realistic philosopher about work? And why is that important for us today? Well, I'm going to start with the importance right away, right? Because what's important about his teaching is that he gives us a perspective that's different from the way that most of us approach work. He actually says that by working, we can become better people. Now, you got to be careful how you interpret that, right? And we're going to talk about that, but it's important because do you take that perspective into work yourself? I think most of us attack our day as something that we have to do, and we're thinking about what we get to do at the end of our work day. And why? Because, work is kind of a toil. You think about the stresses you can have either as a manager when you're looking at your employees saying, my goodness, this is difficult. This one's got this drama going on. This one's causing me this drama. This one is saying that they've done things and then they haven't done them, and you say, oh goodness, if work would be great if only there weren't workers. And then if you have a manager on the other hand, then you're saying, I could do such great work if only it wasn't for him or her. Right. And it's true. Sometimes you get these positions where, your only way out is to leave the company. Right. So you find yourself either way, either the boss or the people who work for the boss. You find yourself in a conundrum that says, I'm facing a reality called toil. And it just doesn't make work fun. So what we usually end up doing is, we look for our paycheck. We work for our paycheck. We stop looking for work to give us something more than we think it can give us. And we just accept that our life is a drudgery. You think about this with motherhood, for example, or fatherhood back at the home. And is it fun for you to do the laundry? Well, no, I don't think I've never found someone who says this is just so much fun. Maybe a young mom will say this is a lot of fun, but that kind of wears off after about 6 months. And you realize that, there's always someone who's going to be there for you. Someone is always going to be waiting for you and will always be there no matter what. And that person is laundry. Laundry will always be there for you, no matter what. It's our best friend, right? But it gets old, and there's just a drudgery to it. Well, is there a way to look at that where you can actually say, no, doing this chore, whatever it might be, is actually the key to me becoming more myself, that this could actually perfect me. Is there a truth about work where if I do it correctly and well and approach it with the right mindset, I can actually look at this as something that perfects me, that makes me a better person? And then it's amazing because you might be in a situation of toil, but you can say that that toil has a purpose. And that purpose is that if I can't progress the world through my labor, I can at least make progress on myself, right? I'm going to read to you a thought from Pope John Paul II. He was a pope who thought a lot about work. And he was obviously someone who had to work himself, even in very difficult situations. He was at one point, when the Nazis took over his country, he was thrown into the mines. And he went from the mines and then into a chemical factory where, this is pretty rough stuff. And the other workers would actually protect him by kind of like hiding him away so that he could study in order to be ordained a priest. But even while, they couldn't hide him all the time, he was exposed to that rough and difficult toil of manual labor. And so he writes, this is in Laborum Exercens, paragraph number 9. He writes very beautiful about this. He says, sometimes heavy toil will accompany human work. This does not alter the fact that work is the means whereby man achieves that dominion which is proper to him over the visible world by subjecting the earth. Toil is something that is universally known, for it is universally experienced. It is familiar to those doing physical work under sometimes exceptionally laborious conditions. It is familiar not only to agricultural workers who spend long days working the land, which sometimes bears thorns and thistles, but also to those who work in mines and quarries, to steel workers at their blast furnaces, and to those who work in builders' yards and in construction work, often in danger of injury and death. It's true. If you've ever met a roofer at a party or something, you can always ask him, have you ever fallen off a roof? It's funny, but that's actually something that most roofers understand, that they have fallen at one point or another in their career off of a roof. And you think, my gosh, this is a pretty dangerous thing. Yes. And we all have those. And then he goes on, he says, it is familiar to doctors and nurses who spend days and nights at their patient's bedside, of course. It's familiar to women who sometimes, without proper recognition on the part of society or even of their own families, bear the daily burden of responsibility for their homes and the upbringing of children. Toil is familiar to all workers, and since work is a universal calling, it is familiar to everyone. End quote. What a great little summary by the Pope of this condition that work's difficulty presents to us. Now, the question is, what are you going to do about it? Remember what I always say, having problems is not a problem. Having problems with having problems, that's the problem. We are going to experience toil. It is just a part of it. What are you going to do about it? Are you going to stop? Many of us end up saying, well, because work is toil and there's an aspect of drudgery into everything that I do, I'm just going to not do it with my heart. All right. Well, if you do that, what happens? Number one, the world is weaker because you don't give your genius to it. Number two, the work is less enjoyable because nobody wants to work with somebody who's just checked out. It's no fun. You're no longer a great colleague to your team at all. You can't exhibit any kind of leadership when your heart is not in it. But then number three, you're cutting yourself off from a marvelous experience where you could become better through work. You said, how is that possible in a world of toil just like that I'm experiencing, or of drudgery or of difficulty? Exactly. You don't feel like it makes you happy. But being happy is more than a feeling. That's the thinking of Aristotle. And that's why I want to go back to Aristotle with you, because he's going to show us a pathway forward where maybe we could actually, instead of allowing our feelings to dictate reality, wouldn't it be marvelous if we let reality dictate our feelings? What if in fact doing authentically good things could make us feel happy? It is possible, and he's going to show us the way.
Would you like to hear more from Father Nathan? Join the St. John Leadership Network and receive a 2-minute glance at the gospel every Sunday morning right to your phone. To learn more, go to www.stjohnleadershipnetwork.org/member and join for free today.
We all know that work is a challenge, or at least it presents a challenge. I mean, sometimes work is just pure joy. Let's just admit it, But I'm going to focus us in here, not just on the joyful parts, but on the parts that are a real challenge for us. I don't know, if you're in a relationship with a coworker and the coworker is extremely annoying, that can be difficult. You're supposed to do a project together and you end up doing all the work while the other person is obviously not caring. They're just so excited that they have you as the partner because you get to do the work for them, right? Or sometimes just the work itself is just utterly dreadful. I'm thinking of the time when I was a young adolescent and I was gathering chicken eggs by hand in a chicken farm. And let me tell you, I mean, you can all just imagine that scenario. There's 10,000 chickens. Think of the smell of 10,000 chickens, and they'd given me this little, not even a hospital face mask, just like some sort of very kind of scanty dust mask that would fall off your face. The chicken coops were around 100 degrees and we're in there gathering chicken eggs, right out of the chickens. I mean, incredible work, right? Just terrible. I tried my best to make it something positive, and I could not find anything positive about gathering 10,000 chicken eggs, in a 4-hour period, pushing my little cart along, the caged chickens. No, I mean, it's an honest day's work, that's for sure. And we need those chicken eggs, that's for sure. But, the experience was a difficult one. Let's just put it that way. And you have many of those experiences. Is there any way to redeem it? Well, of course, we can do it by prayer, by offering our sacrifice in union with the Mass. We can say, I offer this up to God, right? But is there something that we can also get out of it? Well, let's just be honest. I mean, sometimes it's really hard. I mean, when you're gathering chicken eggs in the middle of the summer, with no respite, and, it's very difficult. But in most cases, you can. And here's a line from John Paul II again, Laborum Exercens, which is his encyclical on work, 1981. You can find it. And this is paragraph 9. He says something beautiful about this. He says, work is a good thing for man, a good thing for his humanity, because through work, man not only transforms nature, adapting it to its own needs, but he also achieves fulfillment as a human being, and indeed, in a sense, becomes more a human being. And he then goes on to talk about the conditions where sometimes work can actually lower a human being's dignity because it can be abused, etc. But what I want to focus on with you here is what he mentions, that in fact, by working, I can become more a human being. That is John Paul II leaning on the thought of Aristotle. Now, he mentions Thomas Aquinas because he's a pope, and popes usually talk about saints. They don't talk about pagan philosophers quite as much. But in fact, St. Thomas Aquinas is basing his thinking on Aristotle. And that thinking is this, that for Aristotle, right, he says that work actually has 4 different meanings, 4 different senses. Right, so we usually think of it as something that we do as our profession, right? Something that but actually inside of us, the same word, work, can be understood in 4 different ways. And let's go into this with you, right? The first is that it is what he calls a habit. That means that there's a capacity that you have inside of you, right? That is your ability to work. Well, that's already something. It seems like our teenagers are not aware of this. They can wake up at 10 o'clock in the morning and they do nothing, not even get out of their pajamas until it's time to go to bed again, right? Well, they haven't discovered that they have this capacity, this wonderful capacity to go out into the world and change it for the better. Well, that capacity in us is something that we possess as part of our identity, right? So Aristotle develops that. It's part of our identity. The second is that it denotes an intrinsic perfection in our nature. This is also really amazing. That means that because it's part of our capacity, work by doing it represents a perfection. I am more a human being when I am working than when I am not. All right, now it doesn't mean that there's not other activities that also make you human, like contemplation for Aristotle or study or something like that. But work in itself, according to Aristotle, represents a kind of perfection, right? It's one type of perfection, and there are others, but it's a perfection. It's something that's good. So between someone who says like, I never work, I don't know how to work. Think about it when it comes to cooking. This is a common thing. People say, I don't know how to cook. Well, you kind of scratch your head, because it's one thing if you're, 10 and you don't know how to cook, but when you're 50 and you don't know how to cook, well, it's a choice. It's a choice that you made, And it's kind of, it's not necessarily a positive thing. It's kind of like, well, I'm sorry that you don't know how to do this, which is kind of important for, everyone else in the world to do. So you've chosen not to. Okay, well then, onward you go. But you're missing something that's kind of an essential perfection, an essential thing that you really should have, right? So that's an example, right? And no offense to people who don't know how to cook at age 50, but, I'm just saying, I'm pointing it out, right? Because for the rest of us, it's like, oh yeah, we get that now. That it's a state. Well, when you're doing your profession, recognize that you're growing in that perfection. For you to say, I am a lawyer, is a state of perfection. Now, it doesn't mean that you're absolutely perfect. You can't get any better. It means that you've brought something to a completion inside of yourself that is good, right? This is why it's important to connect this with truth, because the truth about work is that it's a pathway for you to truly become more yourself. And I'm not just making this up, out of the thin air. This comes from the thinking of Aristotle. And his thinking is time tested now for 2,400 years, right? So there's something to it. The third thing that Aristotle says is that this capacity to work is a form of excellence. And by that, he means that it makes a person good. It makes a person good. And that brings us to the fourth point, which is that he then says, well, you know what? It's not his ultimate goodness. Okay, so summarize those 4 points. Basically, work is something that is a capacity that flows from who you are. Secondly, you can look at work as a kind of skill. It's something that you acquire with time, and that is a form of perfection. I'm good at this. Third point is that it makes you good insofar as your ability to do something is a perfection, a type of perfection for who you are. Right? So you as a person have achieved something, not just in your ability to perform a skill, which itself is a type of achievement, a specific part of yourself, but it fulfills a human being to do work to a degree. That's the fourth point, which is not to the ultimate degree, but still in a genuine degree. So I know that can seem really technical, but I think anybody who's working and understands this from the inside, work makes you happy. When you do work well, it makes you happy. And that's what John Paul II was saying. There's a dignity that's achieved by that work. I look, for example, at the folks who are resisting retirement. You say, the time has come now, you can sell your business and then you can move on. And they say, I don't know how to stop working, because if I stop working, what's the point of my life? Now, I'm not saying that that's a good thing by any stretch of the imagination, but I am saying that indicates something. The person's found goodness there. They found fulfillment there. What they need to find is that fourth step by Aristotle. It says, yes, and that fulfillment is not ultimate, which is why retirement is actually important. You're always going to work. You need to do the garage. You need to paint the house. You need to volunteer for other associations. There's all kinds of things. But you need to discover that ultimate part of who you are, which needs to be perfected by something greater than work, by love.
Would you like to start your Thursday mornings with a scriptural leadership lesson? Join the St. John Leadership Network, where Father Nathan hosts a 30-minute call at 6:30 a.m. in all 4 U.S. time zones. To learn more, go to www.stjohnleadershipnetwork.org/member and join for free today.
So we've looked really deeply here at what Aristotle and Pope John Paul II have to say about the nature of work as it reflects on the worker. And that is that work is actually a blessing, because through it, the human being is able to find a perfection, reach a kind of culmination. It is a good thing to say that you are a doctor. It is a good thing to say that you are a good dad, right? Well, that being a good dad is more than love. Being a good dad means playing baseball, and it means leading the family at prayer, and it means organizing the day, and it means all kinds of things, right? So you have to do a type of work on the outside, transforming the world in order for you to be a good dad, right? So, or to be a good welder, or to be a good roofer, or whatever it is that you do, that capacity to transform the world is actually a state of perfection, a kind of perfection inside of the human person. And we went on to say it's just not the ultimate perfection, and that we need to take that journey towards the ultimate. That's the thinking of Aristotle. And so I'm glad you were able to, he's amazing to go back in antiquity. That's one of the neat things about, our Christian tradition is that it stretches now over 2,000 years, and then it has its roots even in the thought of antiquity, which is just amazing blessing. The problem is work doesn't always feel that way. And in fact, the culture around us, sometimes it depends on what, your situation, but in many situations, the culture of people that are around us are not really pro work. You can think, for example, of the different practices that can happen in where the group think of a certain group of workers is that if we unite together, we can then dictate terms of work that encourage laziness, or that it actually don't stress the quality of the work. I remember just one example from my adolescence when I was working on a roofing crew and as a roofer. And I remember that we would take a break. We would take a break in the morning and take a break in the afternoon. Yes, but when does that break start? Well, you would think that break starts at a certain time and finishes at a certain time. But then that's not fair because it takes the whole crew has to get down off of the roof one by one on the ladder. Out of safety concerns, you can't have more than one person on a ladder. So that takes time. Well, so the dictate that we determined was the break time starts when the last guy gets there. Well, sometimes that would actually double the break time. So instead of a 15-minute break, it would actually be a 30-minute break because all of us began the break effectively when, the work stopped, but the timer didn't start on the break until the last man arrived at the table. And so, you could just see that was a little bit of an abuse there, right, from our team. But since we were united on it, we were able to make the law. And the law was, therefore, not encouraging industry or a spirit of sacrifice for the job. In fact, then we would simply say we didn't have enough time to complete the job. This was not a good spirit of work. And you know what? It didn't really perfect us. To this day, you think back at something like that and you're like, wow, that's just not really, you don't care about your work. Well, if you don't care about your work, then it's not going to make you a better person. That's true. But what was I doing? In that experience there, we were following our feelings. We were saying, we really don't care about this, and we don't really want to care about this because, for all kinds of different reasons, perhaps because of the toil, the drudgery, we weren't proud of what we were doing. And so we were looking for the easy way out. Right? Well, so if you think about that, if you're a manager, look at your work team. What's keeping them from being engaged? How do you get engagement out of your workers? How do you avoid that kind of scenario? Well, one great way to do it is help them to connect what they're doing with an inner perfection inside of themselves. For example, do you reward them for good work? Do you help them to see also that you need them to perform the good work? Do they feel like they're adequately compensated for what they're doing? And beyond that, do they feel your support? Are you there as a leader with them, showing them from the front that yes, there's difficulty and ardor and toil involved in this, but there's something greater that they're achieving by it. Whenever you divorce the working situation from its ultimate end, which is the happiness that it's bringing to others, the happiness of working well together as a team, and the happiness of someone who can take pride in what they're doing, well, then the toil just overwhelms it, and it becomes something we try to divorce ourselves from, which is not good leadership. I just think of a great example would be the leadership of a parent at home trying to get the kids to do the chores, right? Why do kids not want to do chores? It's because they don't see how this could possibly make their life better. It's pure drudgery. That's something that they're forced to do. And sometimes, yes, you have to force your kids to do the chores because it's just they have to learn to see the joy that's in there. But an amazing technique to work with kids is to help them to discover that joy. I remember, talking to a father who had been working with his sons, and he had them doing difficult labor. They're putting up a fence together. It took them all day long to do it. And I remember the kids said, "Dad, can we get paid for this?" And the dad looked at him and smiled and said, "Yeah, you get to wash your hands, go inside, and have a good dinner." And the kids, reflecting on that, were talking about how that was actually enough for them. They felt so great. And it was because the way the dad approached the work was that this is something good to do. This is something healthy and happy that allows them to work well And that the kids were then, reflecting that Dad used to say to them, you know what? By working, don't you feel good? Right? It's just a silly kind of example, small example, but it's right to the point of what I'm talking about. If you allow your emotions around the drudgery of your labor to overcome you, you will be missing an awesome opportunity. Now, Aristotle goes into this, and he says that the thing about any virtue, like work, he says work is a virtue. It doesn't mean work the action, but working by action develops this kind of virtue inside of us called work. Now, the thing about a virtue is that by doing it, you discover a deeper joy than you did when you didn't do it. But you have to discover the joy on the other end of actually going through whatever challenge is in front of you. This is why it's so important to lead in truth. In truth, we know that a job well done is worth doing. We also know in truth that when we are able to do a job well over and over and over again, there's the pride inside of us that comes by being able to claim our profession, to say that I am an audio engineer. I am a musician, right? It's something, you go to parties and they're like, what do you do? And you say, I am a chemist. I mean, that's a thing of honor, and it should be, right? And so you discover that, but only through the drudgery of study and toil and labor and day by day. But little by little, says Aristotle, if you discover that by practicing it, you get to live in it. You, in other words, find a joy within a work that's done well, by doing the work well. And so this is a hopeful thought that on the other end of us leading for Christ, being disciplined in our labor, being responsible that God tells us to be, there's an excellence. There's a development of who we are and a joy that comes from doing work well.
Dare great things for Christ.
Share your feedback with Father Nathan. Send us an email at communications@stjohninstitute.org. That's communications@stjohninstitute.org. And visit www.stjohninstitute.org and sign up for our newsletter to receive updates from Father Nathan.